This is the 9th edition of this course. 10 years ago, I came to Professor Marco Tebrommelstrud and said, why isn't there a cycling course, an academic course on cycling in the cycling capital of the Netherlands? And he said, I don't know, I'm going to go ask if we can do it. And 1 week later, we had an okay, an approval from the summer school's office. We had a draft program that then got completely destroyed and re-put together into a program that was 3 weeks long. And today is the final event of this course. It is a collaboration between Urban Cycling Institute, an independent nonprofit based in Amsterdam and originally founded at the UvA, and the University of Amsterdam itself. And what we aim to achieve in the Urban Cycling Institute is to rethink our mobility systems. And this was one of the key starting points for this course. We also want to bring science to practice and back. So taking academic knowledge, academic research, and giving it a new face, a new life to apply into practice, and then addressing these urgent need for action. Our world, our planet is facing extreme challenges, from the health of our society to climate change, environmental degradation, political instability, poverty, unemployment. And we see cycling as a lens to start thinking about this change. We are able to approach this city and this course as an outsider. We have 24 people representing 9 countries, and maybe a little more because some people are actually representing 2 or 3 countries if they're from somewhere else and living in another. So this outsider perspective is truly an asset to this program, because we're in a place where cycling is so normal. You need outsiders like Planning the Cycling City to ask questions about the water in which the fish are swimming. Otherwise, the fish just keep swimming. So it's not a coincidence that this course happens in Amsterdam, a matured cycling environment where conditions are ripe for experiencing and learning in a truly immersive way. And my clicker doesn't want to work, but go like this maybe. No, I will not. Oh. Yes. So in this class, we talk about cycling as a boundary object, something you could almost hold up, and from one topic to another, one concept to another, one phenomenon to another, we can analyze through the lens of cycling. So with this course this year, we had 12 rabbit holes, what we like to call rabbit holes, to explore cycling as a lens. So history, public health, urban planning, sociology and research methods, the bike-train combination with the bike train guru himself, the subjective experience of cycling, ethnographic methods, how we study cycling, mobility narratives, mobility justice, gendered mobility, the politics of knowledge, and how do we translate and transfer all of this knowledge home. We are so honored to have these fantastic UvA researchers here for these 3 weeks. Some are even sitting in the audience. Thank you, Gerben. And what they had to do, what this group had to do for these last 3 weeks, not only go to the sessions, which were intense themselves, not only do excursions and scavenger hunts and missions and explore the city. But they had to put on social science hats, which for some, I can tell you, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, was a challenge, right? To put on this new lens and see the city and experience the city in a different way. Their key assignment was to design a research study in the 3 weeks. Okay? They had to design a pilot study and collect empirical data. This was no small task in 3 weeks. This is something even my master's students have trouble with, right, in a period of 6 months. So they had 3 weeks to do this. And from all different practitioner perspectives, academic perspectives, levels, backgrounds, and experience, they had to come together to decide on a research question and methods. And then they had to go out into the city and collect this data. And they are here today to share their process with you, and to share their findings with you, and to share a key message about what they have learned in 3 weeks. And we are also joined online, for those who do not know. I don't know the number right now, but I think there were like 100 or so registrations. So hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. And we are joined, I did look at the registration list, by several alumni of this course, because it doesn't stop here, right? The alumni of this course spans the globe. We have about 300 change agents in 37 countries, and we are adding a few more to that country list with this group. And they have developed fascinating impact from this course, which we put together into a few different publications. We had 66 alumni join us last June for an event where we brought together this energy to co-create and co-produce a manifesto of actions. How can governments and cities transition towards cycling-friendly communities? What are the key actions that they could take? So over the course of a full day, we developed 50 key actions and co-published it together in a book. So the alumni are still very active, and thank you, Mark Ames and Inez and Mateo Jara, if you are listening. They have partnered with us on developing their own courses, their own Planning the Cycling City, sometimes in their own language. So we have a Spanish course in September. We have now an Italian course in October, where alumni have said, hey, I want to do this, but I want to do it in my own language, because we know how much language matters when planning and making decisions. So if you are interested in those, please let us know. So today, we are also honored to have some guest judges. And these 3 individuals will provide a short reflection after the presentations by our cohort. And I would just like to point them out. We have Joyce David. Where is Joyce? Right here. So, she is a PhD candidate at University of Kent, with me there in urban planning, studying children's autonomy and their mobility. We have Vikas Bagde. Vikas. Where's Vikas? He's joining in a second. He's joining in a second. Vikas is a PhD candidate here at the UFA in urban planning, studying innovation in India, where rickshaws are being transformed into electric rickshaws, and he's studying this bottom-up social process in India. And we have a very special guest today, offering a different perspective other than academia, but practice. Anna Hoving, thank you so much for being here. She's a policy advisor for the city of Amsterdam and a graduate of UvA, right? Yes, and an UvA graduate. So I am very happy to also introduce our first group. And how this will go is that they have 10 minutes to present, and only 10, guys. And they did so much work, and they have to wrap it all up in 10 minutes. So it's a huge challenge, and I want to say thank you for our students for engaging with this. They have 10 minutes to present, and the next group will come right up after that. So we have 5 groups of 10 minutes each. After they are done, we're going to ask our judges to come up and give short 3-4 minutes reflection. And then we are extremely honored to do a exclusive screening of a documentary also made by a researcher about commutes in Colombia. And it's a documentary called Invisible. And she highlights, although it's not about cycling per se, but it's another rabbit hole. It's another lens to explore very unique individual perspectives on travel, right? And how we get around and what that means to our identity and our communities. And she'll be joining us online for a short Q&A after her documentary. So without further ado, group 1, let's go. And one little rule that we like to establish before presenting is that I will ask them, are you ready? And once they say yes, we give them another round of applause because they have to keep the flow of the energy going, right? So in 1 second. Are you ready?
Yes. Thank you all so much. We're really excited to be here today to present with you all. Introduce the rest of the team. We have Miriam, Felix, Is, and Will, and my name is Jack. Thank you. And our presentation is on intersections of cycling behavior and design. So we've learned a lot in this course about behavior of cyclists, and that's an important background, I think, before we kind of get into too much of our findings. So to start off, we've learned a lot about cycling as being a unique mode of transport. Cyclists don't behave as a car driver would or as a pedestrian, and they should not be planned for as such as well. We've learned a lot about how the movements of cyclists can seem confusing to those who are outside of that sphere. We read a paper earlier on about the existence of scofflaw cycling and how, though those behaviors may seem, against the rules, oftentimes they are very understandable as kind of natural human behavior. The metaphor of cyclists as starlings as well as being a sort of amorphous, very efficient mode of transport seems almost impossible to those outside the realm of cycling, but if you are using that mode of transport, it oftentimes comes quite naturally. And we saw that as a prime example in the 2 shared spaces at the bottom of the slide here. On the left, Alexanderplein, and on the right, the Amsterdam ferry terminal. Both are very efficient uses of space, and in particular, our group was surprised as non-locals to Amsterdam about the removal of traffic lights at Alexander Fine and how that actually seems to work quite well. So with that in mind, sorry, my first time using Clicker. Go back one. Thank you. So with that in mind, our research question was, how does not planned for cyclist behavior occur at recently redesigned separated intersections? So I can unpack that a bit. In this context, not planned for meaning not per the design of the intersection. So we're not making a value judgment as whether it was good or bad, but just we're looking at the behavior that occurred outside of what was intended by the designers of that intersection. And our scope really related to intersections that were separated. So unlike the ones I had shown at on the previous slide, so where there really was a specific route intended, and at intersections that had been redesigned sometime somewhat recently. And we'll get into more of the details of that with Miriam.
So to conduct our pilot study, we selected 2 intersections that have been redesigned in the last decade. So the first one is Nassau Plain near Westerpark, which was redesigned in 2018-2019. And the second one is Heineken Brouwerij on the top of the pipe, which was redesigned in 2021-2022. So we divided our group to directly observe cyclist behavior from each corner of the intersection. So we did it in the afternoon for 30 minutes during peak hour. And our observations were done using manual and digital devices to map the patterns of the cyclists' movements.
Yes, so here we have our results. And first and foremost, I would like to emphasize that the vast majority of cyclists follow the planned design. This is important to have in mind when we are about to present the non-planned for movements. And among these movements, we have been able to identify 4 categories. So we got sidewalk shortcuts, avoiding 2-step turns, cycling on red lights, and stopping in non-stop zones. However, despite being not planned for, most of these movements were not problematic out of a safety perspective. So let's have a look at the ones identified as less desirable. So here we have the Heineken intersection. And starting from the blue route depicts a shortcut crossing the sidewalk. This behavior was observed when there were long queues at the traffic light, and it could be attributed to long waiting cycles and insufficient spacing for cyclists and pedestrians. And the green route, avoiding the 2-step turn, the reason for this behavior is likely due to their reluctance to wait twice at the same intersection. And this behavior tended to intersect with the green marked space being crowded, which too could explain this behavior. And lastly, the yellow zone is an area where cyclists coming from the south is crowding to the extent that pedestrians and cyclists have a hard time passing through, which can be seen in the curves of the purple line at the bottom, as they have to go around. This occurs despite the cyclists arriving from the south are supposed to stop before the zebra crossing.
So over to the intersection we observed at Nassau Plain. At this intersection, we noticed some of the same issues that we did at the Heineken. For example, with cyclists skipping the 2-step turn, as you can see indicated with the yellow and green lines. This was mostly due to wanting to save time and lack of space because of cyclists piling up and clogging lights due to high cycling traffic and long wait cycles. But as you can see as well, we also observed some weird movement patterns in the eastern part of the intersection. And at this point, it seems necessary to point out the elephant in the room. Looking at these intersections, it became clear to us that they still facilitate for high levels of car movement and that the car traffic is still prioritized in the intersection design. During our observations, we noticed that most of the deviant, unlawful, or non-planned for cyclist movement was impacted or influenced by the heavy presence of cars and the state of the traffic at the time of observation. As an example, we could clearly observe that the intersection at the times broke down with heavy queues and cars getting stuck in the middle of the intersection. Whenever this happened, we could observe that cyclists took this into account, and the presence of what we would classify as non-planned for cyclist behavior, like cycling on red lights, went up. However, this also serves as an image of how separated and signalized intersection ultimately is a form of car-oriented infrastructure. And if it wouldn't be for all of these drivers, people on bikes would be able to navigate this intersection fine by themselves through eye contact and negotiation.
So these findings from our research led us to consider that maybe our scope was too narrow, focusing on just cyclist behaviour and omitting the behaviour of other transport modes from within our research design. This prompted us to consider the wider transport policy context involved here in Amsterdam and to consider what the city is working towards. And as you can see from the highlighted boxes behind me, they've got some big aspirations for the transport future. And to us, it appeared that potentially that they're trying to provide for all modes. And in this case, it can result in what we saw in that video, where the system breaks down in a way. And it gave us this sort of impetus to consider whether this prioritization of the fast and efficient movement of cars in and around the city while providing separated designated routes for each mode, as well as having road safety at the heart of all decision making, whether all of this is concurrently possible. So takeaways from our research. Albeit brief, we came away with a couple of options based on what we found. And option one represents a continuation of the status quo. We know that these designs can be updated, and we've seen that there's an appetite for that from the council. And we know that this continuing of redesign can address issues like what we identified with the problem areas that were presented earlier. But for us, this is a potential too much of a focus on the prioritization of movement and traffic flow through an intersection. And this may be, I guess, limiting what we can achieve in the mobility landscape. That being said, there is a recognition that these redesigns have reduced what we the bad behavior or the not planned for behavior that we saw from prior designs. And it just made us consider what we can do moving forward. Option two, though, is largely inspired by our classes here in the PCC, and that is to challenge the underlying narrative and underlying rationale behind why we need separated intersections in the first place. So an alternative mobility future, it could move away from designing for removing conflict and designing away those conflict spaces, and instead providing reconsideration of how we provide access to all transport modes through the city and through and around the city. We can move away from treating these streets and intersections as pipelines for movement and instead reorientate our approach to design for people. Overall, we saw that our research, despite brief, indicated the majority of cyclists behave well and according to the rules of an intersection that's been designed for them. The not planned for and problem areas largely were influenced by the heavy presence of drivers at intersections. It led us to prompted us to a key question upon reflection, and it's to guide potential future decision making. And that is, should our attention when trying to improve and redesign these intersections, should our attention be on controlling these not planned for movements, or do we need to address the elephant in the room? Thank you.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Connie, and I, along with Anna, Emily, Jeremy, and Sophia, study caregiver mobility choices and risk. As most of you are probably aware, children across the world are facing threats to their well-being and mental health. These stem from lack of autonomy and active mobility. We all know we're happier when we're moving around and interacting with our peers. So why has this happened? Dr. Mai-Chinapal reminded us that children need at least 60 minutes a day, 3 times a week of vigorous exercise. And active mobility is a really great way for us to incorporate that into our daily lives. But even here in the Netherlands, the cycling mecca of the world, the rates of children cycling to schools is declining. And so we wondered if safety concerns were playing a role in these declines and how that might vary across cultural backgrounds. So we settled on the research question: to what extent does risk perception influence modal choice in school commutes within Amsterdam's diverse districts? So we focused on 2 districts, Zoud and Zuidoost. And before we go into more details about our research project, we wanted to give you some quick context and a brief history about these districts. So starting with Zoud, Zoud's planning started in the early 1900s with visionary urban plans like Plan Zoud. And the legacy of this plan is still visible in Zoud's monumental blocks, human scale design, and green spaces. A lot of the buildings in Zoud are also in alignment with the Amsterdam School of Design. Today, Zoud is one of the most prosperous districts in the city. It has the highest average income per household, a high Western population, and a low poverty rate. The other neighborhood we chose to look at was Zuidoost. Zuidoost, as you can see in the map in the corner there, is an exclave. It was designed not to be part of the city, but as a residential utopia, with Le Corbusier-inspired high-rises, ample parking infrastructure, wide roads, and separated transport lanes for pedestrians, bikes, and cars. And the effect of that infrastructure, those separated lanes, still affects the frequency of their use today. But going back to the history, the utopian plan ended up that it failed. It failed to attract residents from the city center, and there was high vacancy in Zuidoost until around the 70s, when migration from former colonies and other factors filled the high rises, which then became neglected. And Zuidoost became stigmatized for crime and poverty, and to an extent, those stigmatizations still exist today. However, there's nuance here. Okay, there's nuance here, and that's important, and that's why we wanted to give this brief history and context before going into our research. Today, Zoud is a vibrant cultural melting pot of over 130 nationalities. There's been great economic growth in the region, renewal projects to replace those old high-rises with a lot of new low-rise buildings, and efforts to better connect the district, both physically and socially, with the rest of the city.
So moving on to our pilot project itself, our research methodology comprised of 3 parts: observations, interviews, and comparisons. For the observations, we split up into groups and went to 5 schools, 3 from Zuidoost and 2 from Zoud. We were able to observe 382 children in total, arriving in 3 different transport modes: biking, walking, or by car. We also distinguished within these categories whether they were with a caregiver or not. For the interview questions, we drew upon Dr. Tina Harris's lecture about ethnographies to create the questions that we asked them after observing how they arrived or departed. The first question was, Is your mode of transport typical? The second was, why did you choose that versus alternatives? And the third was, does your child ever bike on their own? We designed these questions to add parent voices to create a narrative regarding their thought processes. Originally, we had considered asking them to rate this safety of their district on a scale from 1 to 10, instead of asking about whether their child bikes alone. But then we have decided on choosing the latter question because it speaks to a more emotional perspective, which is a crucial trait of ethnographies as we learned in class. Finally, we analyzed the differences between the two districts by looking at their modal splits and identifying various themes.
Great. Looking at our observational data first, the first insight we saw was that modal choice really does differ by community. We see that while pedestrian traffic is broadly similar, biking is far more popular in Zoud than it is in Zoudost. And we actually saw a 40% drop comparing these two neighborhoods. Conversely, car usage is much more popular when you look at Zoudost, with a 3x increase in relation. So this tells us there is different modal choices being made, but not why. Our next insight from our observational data was really about that caretaker accompanying the child or not. And here we saw very similar rates across the two districts, with approximately 70% of children in each district arriving with their parent or a caretaker. So this gives us some sense that it's not that, parents in Zoud are perceiving the roads as being safer and therefore choosing more active mobility. They're actually making kind of similar choices about whether to take that safety improving effect of accompanying your child to school. So now we really need to talk to the parents to understand what was happening here. So across our different interviews with parents, we had several themes that jumped out again and again across multiple interviews, multiple districts. The most popular or most common was distance from school. Something being too far to walk, something being not far enough to drive. We saw that make a big difference in sort of what choice they made, as well as whether or not they accompanied their child on that journey. Things like age, a younger child being less likely to go on their own, as well as other road users, and whether their speeds and type of modality is also a key theme that repeated again and again. We see a couple quotes here from some of our interviews, where many angry drivers may not pay attention to small children, maybe not being ready to have a younger child go on their own. So these all were themes that we saw as being connected to risk perception. So our key research question. But that's not the only thing that we saw. We also saw people talk about convenience. Maybe you have to go to work afterwards, and so you need to take a bike to work, so you bring your child on your bike, but you just don't have enough time to let them bike on their own. Similarly, culture is a complicated factor. And it has elements of risk, including things like how you perceive the risk of different genders, as well as practical matters, how big your family is, how hard it is to bring them all in an active. So one key difference, though, we saw is that only in Zoudost do we have people reflect on the car being a transport they chose because of that risk of road users. And so together, these give us some sense that that risk perception is driving some behavior along with the cultural factors.
So overall, the perception of risk has a strong influence on both the modal choice, but also the children level of autonomy when it comes to committing to schools for both districts. And this perception of risk is not just an abstract fear, it's often linked to a very concrete factor, distance, like the longer the journey, the riskier it seems, and therefore less children bike on their own to schools. So in the Netherlands, the distance is not evenly distributed. We can see that immigrants community often face longer commutes, making independence less feasible for the children. So that's why it's really important to integrate their voices in the conversation about mobility, because we might, without them, we might just overlook barriers for their children to have independence in the city. So the real question is not about if children are ready for the city, but is the city ready for the children? So our starting point was a really simple observation: children bike less to school. And by exploring how risk is perceived by the parents, we uncovered that urban space still fails to support children independence. And other researchers showed in 2025 that ensuring physical safety for children in cities often leads to spatial segregation, making children less able to navigate urban complexity. So maybe it's time to think of the city not as just a place to protect, but as a space to be shared with and for the children. Thank you.
Are you ready?
Yes. G'day everyone. Oh, pointed out. So today, as you can see on the title, we are presenting about fat bikes. I'm Yazi, that's Pierre, Haley, Connor, and Nick. So upon arriving in Amsterdam, we were mesmerized by the organized complexity of cycling. And we heard, whilst we were here, a lot of negative rhetoric about fat bikes being a disruption to the established Dutch cycling norms and potentially a danger to society. So perhaps they are disruptive, but as outsiders, we couldn't make the determination inherently without understanding what it's like to be on one. Looking at the media, this is presented as a public health and safety crisis. In response, the discussion has evolved into that of control and discipline in the fat bike riders. So, if we say fat bike riders are the core of the problem, then we're going to have to devise a research method to really challenge that idea. And so throughout the 3 weeks that we were here, we drew upon learnings and presentations by Ran Dang, Dr. Tina Harris, Dr. Jonas Salazari, and Dr. Fergus Mormon in the audience to question the norms and the subjective experiences of cycling. So our research question is, do the norms and subjective experience of cycling differ when riding on a fat bike versus riding on an omnifeet, and how? So in the frame of subjective experience, it might be that they feel differently and so they adapt to that different handling style, but there hasn't been any methodological approaches as such. And we chose to compare these two types of bicycling genres because the omnifeet is the quintessential bicycle in the Netherlands, and typically it has an upright riding position, self-propelled, whereas in contrast, the fat bike is characterized by obnoxiously large tires and is not self-propelled. And sometimes there are modifications to them that allow them to go very fast. Passing on to the next one.
So we conducted a pilot study to investigate the norms and subjective experiences and how they might differ between fat bike riders and omnifeet riders. Before explaining our approach, it's important to acknowledge our own positionality and how it might impact our interpretations of norms and subjective experiences of different kinds of cyclists here in the Netherlands. Firstly, none of us are Dutch. Within our group, we have 2 Americans, 2 Australians, and 1 French person. Each of us frequently cycles in relatively car-dependent contexts. We all see cycling as being very important to prioritize, but among us are transport planning researchers, practitioners, graduate students, and cycling advocates. We're all experienced cyclists, but we had very little experience riding fat bikes prior to this study. We view fat bikes as a bottom-up response to a problem we don't fully understand yet, and top-down regulatory solutions have begun to be discussed. So we learned in this course that ethnography helps to identify gaps between top-down planning and bottom-up uses of space. To paraphrase Dr. Tina Harris in her presentation in the course, to facilitate knowledge exchanges between opposing parties, have them switch places. To investigate this topic and broaden our understanding of how fat bikes fit into the Amsterdam cycling context, we became our own research subjects. To measure the subjective experience of cycling, we designed a small experiment. Each of us rode along a designated route on both an OMA-FEETS and a fat bike, and then completed a survey immediately after each ride. The survey was informed by this framework of the subjective experience of cycling and included questions about each of the components highlighted here. And I'll have Connor explain a little bit more.
Alrighty, so Rand's work is about the plurality of experiences when cycling, but something that we found really interesting was the similarities between us on each of these modes. So for example, most of us mentioned feeling self-conscious or embarrassed when we were riding a fat bike. One of us mentioned that I felt really out of place with all the riders. And a few of us have actually attributed this to the fat bike stigma, making us feel like we were doing the wrong thing by being on one of these bikes, or that we had to conform to the negative behaviour norms that are associated with this method of transport. On the other hand, we had some more positive reported more positive emotions on the OMA-FEETS and said that we were able to blend in a bit more, with someone saying, I did have a feeling of not sticking out. We noted that on the OMA-FEETS, our sensory input came from our surrounds. One of us saying, I saw a lot of interesting shops and cafes. I heard some birds by the park. Others noted feeling the bumps in the road or the smell of garbage on the side of the road as well. Whereas on the fat bike, our sensory input was dulled and narrowed. Most of us mentioned that the only sounds that we heard was the rumbling of our own tyres, and that from a visual perspective, we looked only at the road and other road users. Interestingly though, despite these differences, our perceived safety was very similar on both bikes. Most of us acknowledged the different bikes required us to direct our attention to different things to remain safe, but overall we still felt really in control and that we maintained our normal methods of negotiation and communication with other road users. So overall, our subjective experience of riding the two bikes were different, but we suggest that perhaps elements of these gaps might narrow with a bit more experience on the bike.
Okay, so we then perform observation largely informed by the autoethnographic approach we have just presented. So what have we done? We have been on the field recording 40 minutes of videos at 3 different crossings in Amsterdam, featuring roughly 1,500 cycles, among which we identified a little more than 80 fat bikes. So what are the findings, the main findings? So first, only roughly 5% of people cycling are actually cycling on fat bikes. Also, cyclists in most cases obey the rules and follow similar norms regardless of whether they are on a fat bike or on a OMA-FEETS. And also, it's important to mention that during this time we have so no collisions of any sort, and we have only identified one fat bike riders that could have been identified as reckless.
So our pilot study had a limited observation set, and in future research, we'd really like to expand to a larger sample with more diverse locations in the city and in the suburbs. We also like to employ more advanced technology and better techniques to capture the full story of behavior. In other studies, a POV camera on a rider plus maybe an aerial drone shot really, we think, gives a great understanding of how people are negotiating, how norms are being observed. And we would like to also expand the subjective experience element by conducting a true ethnographic study rather than the auto-ethnographic study that we did in the pilot. We recommend a larger sample set consisting of people who identify as fat bike riders and people who identify as Omnifeets riders. This expanded method would provide a much deeper and clearer picture of the differences and similarities of the subjective experience and riding behaviors between so-called self-identified fat bike and Omnifeets riders. And this information would help to inform policy and refine the discussion around the emerging technology of fat bikes. So we're really encouraged that there's a lot of enthusiasm for road safety in the conversation, especially for young people. It's also great that the mainstream conversation is challenging where motorized vehicles should go and how fast they should go. However, we can't ignore the serious reality around deaths on the road. This table is a representation of media reported road deaths by vehicle crash type. This figure has some limitations, but the important thing to know, and it's really clear by looking at it, is that light vehicles like bikes and people interacting with each other have very little rates of fatality, while cars are orders of magnitude more deadly. So, in conclusion, if we really want to make safe, livable streets where young people are not injured and killed, I think we need to channel this energy towards the real problem and reframe this discussion. Thanks.
That's
Right. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yes.
Hello. Our group, I'm Carl. This is Martine, Heather, and Marianne. These are our little emojis for each of us, so you'll see us throughout the presentation, but just an FYI that I am in fact wearing what that was coincidence completely. So title of our pilot study is Perceptions and Navigation of Cyclists in Shared Spaces. So the first thing is we wanted to just acknowledge some of the learnings that we took away from this course and how we took what we were learning and started to craft and try to understand where we would even take our pilot study. So we were really inspired by the aspects of observation in our section with Gerber Mormon about sociology, as well as the subjective experience and how we experience cycling, both from what we're observing and what we're feeling on our skin. For example, looking at ethnographies of infrastructure, and so we'll be talking about autoethnography a lot too. And finally, looking at how technology can both be used and applied within the aspect of observation within our pilot study. There we go. So our research question is, how do cyclists perceive and navigate shared space? And what does that experience reveal about movement, interaction, and agency within these environments? we weren't exactly sure where to begin, so we went to Vondel Park, a place that we as a group have just really enjoyed in our time here in Amsterdam, particularly because this is a place where there is a high pedestrian and cyclist activity. There is a lot of intersecting traffic flows. So we thought that this might be an interesting place to observe. And we wanted to look at it in the morning when we could capture more people that are using that space as a place of kind of transition, commuting, and also community building. And so in this orange little circle is where we did our observations. So when we went to do a site visit there, we then used that as an opportunity to think about what sort of mixed method approach we wanted to bring in. So using the lectures and experience in the course, we settled on an eye tracking experience, observation, and autoethnography. So we were in this little orange dot place, so it's a little zoomed in from the map earlier, and we did 6 routes. So 1, 2, 3, kind of all over, in order to get a full experience of this particular intersection within the park. And through eye tracking, observation, autoethnography, we're able to see a lot of different pieces of this particular shared space within the park.
Yeah, so one important part of this experiment is the introduction of technology. Technology as ally for the measure of the visual perception of cyclists. So I can scan you now and see who is driving car. So, yeah, so with this kind of technology, we wanted to know more about perception. So the perception is the construction of the reality through your sense, but what can you describe? What can you see? What can you interpret? Which are the stimulus in order to look at specific points? So for these answers, you have to have now the definition or the 3 elements for the measurement. The first of them is the fixation. It means the attention at a specific point in our experiment, saccade as the movement between fixations and areas of interest as the possible classification of fixations according to specific parameters. So you can see here one sample of the eye tracking video or analysis. You see these beautiful eyes of one of us on the top of the video. So after doing this experiment with the eye tracking glasses, we identify 7 types of areas of interest or groups in order to analyze them. And then the process was looking at each video in order to identify the situation. It means in every video, in which second, which kind of typology we saw. And of course, that is a challenge, the interpretation of the visual perception. So the most important slide here with this technology is, of course, the results. As you can see here, we have, so here are 3 important results. The first one, the difference between us. So you see here the travel time in seconds. All the rounds are at the same time, and the bigger the circle, the longer the time we need for the fixation. For example, you have here the results of Carl. Carl was more focused on cyclists and pedestrians. You see the colors, the circles. For Heather, it was so not clear, but she had more focus on external areas and specific points. For Marion, end of the route, the goal, it was an important thing. And for me, I was surprising for my results. I was more looking at the cycle path. So at the end of the experiment, so we had that the half of the experiment, we were looking at the cycle path and cyclists and this intersection as important result.
So in addition to the eye tracking, we also looked at observation. And so what this looked like was as the one of us was on the bike that was going through the intersection, the 3 of us were all observing those interactions and recording those things. And so we collected a lot of really good kind of information that gave us more context to what we as researchers were witnessing the cyclist doing. So here we have Heather Marianne commenting on Heather and her stopping, and a woman behind her getting frustrated as she was waiting to turn. We also looked at autoethnography. So once our routes were completed, we immediately wrote down every sort of feeling or experience that we could remember really from that very quick moment. And so these were direct quotes that are written all from us as well. So Heather actually did comment on needing to stop and put her foot down in order to turn because of so many bikes, but didn't necessarily realize that there was a person that was waiting behind her.
Yeah, some examples of the funny things. At the left side, you see the cute dog. Now, yeah, and Carl was afraid of the police, so he was like doing strange things. Oh, sorry. So yeah, you see, so the police. How to connect numbers and descriptions? Yeah, that's an important way in order to combine the two words of traffic planners, numbers, the social things. How can we improve that? And I think with technology and with this kind of group work together, we can do some important things. So we have a table with the results of the participants, the participation in every typology. And then we had some descriptions, important descriptions. For example, Carl was more focused on the cyclist, on pedestrian. And when we saw the fixation, the number of fixations, the most of them were at cyclists. So it was an important connection, I would say. For Heather, this dock or other elements of the external areas were there. So if you see the number, the percent of for Heather was different in comparison with Marion or Carol. For me, for Marion, she ride more than 100 kilometers per week. She's like a professional cyclist, and you see here, end of the route, it was the fixation, the most important, one of the most important for her, and for me. So I am more of observing infrastructure and things. I really, because of my background, so I have this relation here.
Okay, so what did we kind of come up with? We obviously are taking a mixed method approach, and so we were kind of surprised or really affirmed in our conversation as we were debriefing this that a mixed method interdisciplinary approach can provide a really holistic experience about understanding cyclist behavior in shared space. And that by incorporating data as an additional tool and to the manual data collection methods that we were using, it can give us a really good comprehensive picture, a more behind the scenes experience. And this can be useful for planners and city officials as we're thinking about how to optimize cyclist experience in different shared spaces around our cities. And then finally, we are looking towards the future. We think that this would be an interesting pilot study to take forward. There might be an opportunity to incorporate additional technology, maybe like a personal recording device, so you can record your experience in the moment, explore different differences and similarities between different groups or demographics, and then obviously compare different space typologies as well. So we're just looking at your park, and we might find something different in different areas of the city. That's it.
Right, are you ready?
Yes.
Woo!
Hello everyone. So our group were curious about how people actually feel when moving through Amsterdam's transport system and how their experiences might affect their decision to cycle. So we came to our main research question, which is how does the subjective experience of Amsterdam's multimodal transport network encourage cycling uptake?
We're in the cycling capital of the world, and cycling is synonymous in Amsterdam. So is cycling to the train station as a part of interchange to other modes of transport. So the problem of looking at a society in mass, which is good at one thing, is that you tend to overlook the experiences of the individual cyclist. And so here we wanted to ask the question through this study of what we would like to change and how we would like to change for more. To do this, we took a look at the stations in Amsterdam, and we noticed how these stations act as nodes of activity which pulse outwards radially. Further, we looked at whether there were intersections between these walkable and cyclable radiuses, and tried to look at these intersections and how they could change the character of cycling in Amsterdam. We also considered three major factors for people choosing these specific nodes. And these factors included the multi-transit options and the frequency of connections available at these stations, the quality and availability of bicycling infrastructure at these specific stations, and also in general, the location of each individual station. And so, while considering these, we wanted to categorize our study group into three categories. And the first two were primarily tourists, which are very rarely studied. And so within tourists, we looked at two further categories. One, people who use cycling as a primary mode of transportation. And the second was people who relied more on public transportation. And the third category was our base sample set, which was the locals in Amsterdam, who we studied through interviews, online surveys, and observation during peak hours on working days.
So our study focused on two key locations, which are Amsterdam Central and Amstel Station. Yeah. So Central is Amsterdam's main intermodal hub, offering access to international trains, metro, trams, and buses. It also features large-scale cycling infrastructure. Amstel, on the other hand, is a medium-scale interchange that serves more local, commuter-oriented trips. So we used a small-scale ethnographic method combining field observation with survey responses from station users. So the first questionnaire on the left is for tourists, and the second questionnaire on, maybe the size is different, but yes, the second questionnaire is for locals that we interviewed in person at the station. So our assumption before heading into this research was that free and easily accessible bike parking would increase cycling uptakes at this station. And our second assumption was that most people would prefer either to walk or take public transport than to cycle. So as I mentioned before, in our in-person survey at the two stations, we had a total of 13 responses, where 7 were from Central and 6 were from Amstel. On that day, interestingly, 12 out of the 13 participants reported cycling as their primary mode to the station, while only one respondent mentioned that they prefer to walk. We also asked these cyclists about their satisfaction with the bicycle train interchange at the station. The vast majority of 70% said that they were very satisfied, while a small number said that they felt neutral.
Moving on, we also did a survey for the category 1 and 2 respondents, where category 1 are defined as tourists who mainly use cycle to transport around Amsterdam, and category 2 as tourists who use public transport as their main transport mode. So first up, we asked them if this was their first time in Amsterdam, and majority of them answered yes, and we focused more on that. Next, we asked them what was their main choice of stations for traveling around Amsterdam, and most of them also said that they prefer Amsterdam Central as their main transfer station. Next, we also asked them what was their primary mode of travel for their first and last mile connectivity to these stations, and a significant majority, 50%, responded as tram or metro, 30% responded as bike being their mode of connectivity, and another 20%, around 20%, responded as walking as their main transport mode to these stations. Next, moving on to the qualitative questions, we also asked them qualitative questions like their what, how, and where. So first up, we asked them, how would you explain your general experience of interchanging between bike and train? Next, we asked them whether there were any barriers or difficulties they faced when interchanging between these stations, and also what improvements they would suggest to make this bike trains and transition smoother for them. So in total, we interviewed around 13 Dutch locals and around 15 tourists in Amsterdam.
All right, so from the pilot study, we interviewed two groups of people. So for the yellow dialogue is for the tourists, and the gray dialogue is for the local. So most of the tourists wanted more signage, bike parkings, so that they can better understand where bikes should be parked. And also some wanted to have a day pass or like a tourist card for them to park in the underground spaces, as they don't have an OV chip card. So onto the locals, most of them wanted sheltered parking spaces and also more parking railings and more parking spaces that are open 24 hours. And when we will interview people in Central, most people mentioned that it would be better if there are more gantries at the entrance and exit due to peak hours. So next up, one quote from the tourists that struck us the most is that as visitors in Amsterdam, they felt that they needed more instruction on the cost, the location, and how long they can park the bicycle.
Based on the 28 responses across interviews, observations, and online forms, so 3 main points came up about what changed that both tourists and locals expected. So among tourists, the first and the most point that was repeated over again was easier and more visible wayfinding at stations. The phrase that I didn't use it because I didn't know it existed or because I didn't know where to find it was one that was thrown around multiple times through multiple interviews. So it is noticeable that more than the infrastructure that exists, the information that the infrastructure exists should be more visible, which also brings us to our second point, which is information visibility. We have certain infrastructure that's already available to tourists, but then a streamlined source of information on where to access them and how to access them would be really helpful. And the third is an alternative day pass for tourists for parking, to access OV feeds and other rental bike services was noticed that people said that they would cycle more if they had access to the same. Looking at the locals, they had 3 major asks, which were also in alignment to what the tourists had said, which was more sheltered bicycle parking in and around stations that were easily accessible, more entries to parking and stations, both through underground parking stations and directly into the station from other modes of transit. And the third was better systems at bicycle infrastructure, especially which we noticed at Amstel stations, calling for a numbering system or a certain system that would allow them to find their bikes much easier.
Some of the responses from tourists and locals. We found 3 conclusions. Firstly, we found that land use and location play a big role than cycling infrastructure. For example, Amstel station with more space and easier navigation was more attractive to cyclists, even though Central Station had better facility on paper. Secondly, visibility and clarity are just as important as availability. People won't use bike parking or OVPs if they don't know where it is, how it works, or whether it is available. Finally, the success of multimodal cycling depends on the user and the contact. So the takeaway is this: even in a cycling-friendly city like Amsterdam, design need to match the user's experience and the surrounding context. Amsterdam provides an ideal context for starting cycling as part of a multimodal journey because the city already has strong cycling infrastructure and habits. But if you have repeated this service in other locations, even within Amsterdam's other stations, we might see very different results. The same questionnaire could be used at any other popular station in our city to help identify the key barriers to cycling as part of modal interchange. So in that sense, our project not only reviews something about Amsterdam, but also offer a tool that others can apply and adapt to different urban contexts. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, do we need one more round? Well, in the spirit and tradition of academia, we have a feedback and reflection. Feedback and reflection has been an ongoing part of this course. We start every session with a round of a check-in every morning, and we have feedback throughout the course as well. And this is an important part of learning and growing. So I'd like to ask our two judges who are here. Unfortunately, Vikas had something come up and he's not able to join. But Joyce and Anna, if you would come up and share with us your short reflection on these presentations and work. For a few minutes, since Vikas isn't here, we have all this. I'm not going to put a timer on you.
What I first noticed is that I was really surprised by all of these initiatives that were shown today. And I just wanted to, first of all, say big thanks to all of you, because in this short period of time, I've seen that you've done a lot of marvelous things. So one key takeaway for me, I'm a writer, I write stuff down, is that design is the key element that is returning in each of everyone's presentation. And that is also like the big question regarding children, regarding shared spaces, regarding train infrastructure. It's all like a key element that is returning. And it asks us that the bigger question is, who should we design and how should we design? And right now, a lot of our elements that we keep reusing regarding bicycle infrastructure is like looking at the bicycle in the way how we look at a car and just like make mini roads, mini intersections, and we copy paste transport mechanisms from automobility, and we just expect them to work for bicycles. And each of everyone kind of illustrates that way of thinking comes at a cost and gives us consequences. So that was like the biggest key takeaway. So thank you. I don't know, should I just go like discuss every
yes, please.
Each and every one? Okay, so the first one.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. Maybe just another key takeaway, perhaps, because it is also okay. A lot of methodologies used today, I have also a background as a mobility officer, really offers perspectives for local practitioners. And I think it's a challenge and an opportunity to look at how can we use what has been showcased today, how can we offer that to our local mobility officers or local practitioners in the field and inspire and empower them to use it. And I think about the first presentation, the way that you monitored the intersections, the way that you looked at those bicycles, how they move around, what you see. It was I saw those notes, very easy tool to use, very fascinating. I also noted down the glasses. That was something yeah, also really nice to know, handy to use. So I think, yeah, it could be an opportunity to think about how can we further explore these methods to the field. Okay, thank you. I feel like a little bit like the odd one out. I did do my master's here in Amsterdam, but I am not an academic. I'm a policy advisor. So I have some general observations. First of all, my biggest compliments. This was really, really interesting. My main, I don't know if this is a big compliment, but I find it really fascinating that in 3 weeks you guys have pinpointed all the sore spots that we are currently working on in the city of Amsterdam, which I think is confronting, but also very cool, like behaviour, especially children cycling to school, road safety, the Fatbikes and how to deal with them, the train bike connection. These are all really like on yeah, topics we are currently working on and dealing with and struggling with because it's really tricky. I found that really cool. I found it really cool how you guys will work with different research methods, like ethnography, but also very technical stuff, like very interesting things. I'd love to read more about your research. Just you can send it to me. Now diving into the specifics per group. The first group I found really interesting is you picked two intersections. One of them, Nassau line, is both the main network for cars, but also main network for bicycles. It's an interesting intersection where both these, there's only two types of modality that can have main metropolitan network on each road. Usually you have car and bus, and then you have bike and pedestrian, but this one is an interesting one because it's car and bicycle. Very interesting. And the one outside of the Heineken experience used to be the deadliest crossing in Amsterdam. So well done on picking that one. We've done some weird experiments there. I don't know if you can find if you Google. We used to have like inspired, I think, from Japan and Korea, having lights that turned red when the light was red, but that turned off when it was green, to like try and influence cycling behavior that they wouldn't cross the red light. I think it works. And now we've just redesigned it. Yeah. But as a, yeah, we are doing stuff to try and reduce cars in the city that should help these intersections, but it's a long-term game. The second one, yeah, like this is such a pinpoint for us. Kids cycling to school and their parents feeling like it's safe for their kids to cycle to school, which is really tricky. But it's really interesting to see because we do a lot of this cycling simulation in neighborhoods where we know people don't cycle as much, which is Zuidoost, New West, and North. We actually haven't done that much in Zuid because everyone just assumes it's a well-off area and they don't need the help. But it's, yeah, it's interesting to see how this works in Zuid as well. I have two questions. You talked about biking, walking, and car use. Why not public transport? Because Zuidoost is really good public transport, and a lot of people there use public transport for a lot of things, even if it's just one metro stop. That was one question. Or do people just not take their kids to primary school on public transport? My second one was, if your kid is in front of you in a cargo bike, what kind of category is that? Because that's active mobility for the caretaker, but not for the kid. That was just a question I had. And then the next one's my favorite topic, Fatbikes. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, what I on the policy side work on a lot is the legality of Fatbikes. We talk a lot about to lawyers and legal people about what makes a fatbike and why is it a bicycle and not a moped. It's not very interesting, but legally it's a bicycle because you pedal. Yeah, I was also it's interesting to see the smaller frame of vision you get when you're on a fatbike because you are just going faster, and that's just the effect of going faster. But it's interesting to see that because you guys also pinpointed it as being a bottom-up response to something, and in my theory is it's a bottom-up response to the city and the country trying to phase out mopeds from bike lanes. I feel like this is a response to that. I don't know, it's just my theory. What was there? The cyclists in the shared spaces. That's so cool. Like we do a lot of pilots in Vondelpark because Vondelpark is always highlighted as a space where people, pedestrians and cyclists, like they both use the park intensively. It's a main cycling network, but it's obviously also a park for recreation. That was really cool. I'll be interested to see if you'd ever expand this to input gender as a factor, because I've seen these glasses being used, especially at night time, to look at public space. And this is something that we also look at in Amsterdam to how to make tunnels more safely. But I would wonder how that works in the park as well. Do men and women, they experience public space differently? How does that work when you're on a bicycle?
And I wanted to say, because it's in line with pilots we've done previously, where we look at stress levels. But it's very tricky to look at stress levels, and actually the eye movement would be a really interesting factor in that, like stress levels while cycling. How am I doing for time?
Last point, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So the last group is the bike train connection. It's really interesting because at one point I was just writing down loads of questions, and I realized I'm writing down all these questions because City of Amsterdam, I work for the Department of Mobility and Public Space. We never think about tourists on bikes. Like we do in the sense of that they're the hindrance to the Amsterdam cyclists. We never think about like how the cyclists use bicycles. I was just writing down like, oh, cyclists ride bikes to stations and then get the train. We had no idea that we sure they do that, but like they're not in the framework. Yes, and also like all the stuff that's built at train station that you need an overchip bike at Central Station to like park your bike. That's all because it's all built for the locals. But yeah, it's obviously preferable for tourists to go around by bicycles than for them to like get into taxis. I was curious though, because you said at the beginning you wrote down your assumptions. You assumed that people would prefer public transport and walking over cycling. I wonder why that would be. It's because tourists are assumed to be scared of cycling, or is it for? Yeah, that was a question I had. Yeah, yeah, I really like the fact that it just opened up a massive blind spot that we have. So thank you.
The small gift for also sharing your perspectives with us and traveling far from Belgium. Thank you. Thank you for your reflections and from both sides of the academia and practice. Thank you so much.